Hey, this is Professor Homa. Welcome to Project 2, working on the JLC site. For the first project, we put together a web page comp. This time we're actually going to put together the entire web page with our HTML and CSS. Here's a folder that you're going to work with. Now, a lot of this will be done for you, especially if you're new with CSS especially, and the HTML will be done. The HTML will be done for you as well. There's also going to be an images folder, which you can see right now is empty. You're going to put files in there, and you're only going to put 2 files in there. And where you're going to get them from is going to be from your original web page comp. And the first thing I'm going to do is going to open up my web page comp file. If you don't have your guides showing, make sure they're showing. You even want to have your pixels showing up here. If it's showing inches, make sure it's pixels. If your rulers aren't showing, go to View and just make sure rulers is checked down here. If your guides aren't showing, go to Show Guides. Make sure your guides are showing as well. And what we're going to do is we're going to first of all just sample some colors and write them down so that we have them when we work on our web page. We're also going to take some measurements. So the best thing to do is to actually print this out. You could print this out on a page and then you could kind of make notes on it so that you don't have to keep going back and forth to your Photoshop file. So we're just going to take some measurements, and we're going to take the easiest ones first. We're going to look at the header section up here, and this, remember, this is why we gave our layer folders these names, because these are going to be the way the sections are set up in our HTML page. The first part, working our way down, is the header section, and I'm using my marquee tool, and what I'm going to do is just kind of measure down. I'm not worried about the width, just measuring down, because I know the width is 840 already, because that was our original size of our page, and I'm measuring down, and it's 161. Some of these numbers we're going to round off to the nearest even number, so I'm probably going to make that 160. So the height of our header is going to be 160. We're not going to worry about the width because that's 840. The next part we're going to look at is the address bar, and I'm just going to measure down, and that's roughly 29 pixels. We'll round that up to 30. Same thing with our footer. Our footer will also be 30 pixels. And for some of this stuff, we're also going to have, like, our padding is going to be like 30 pixels. This section in the middle where it's main, we call this main, it's going to be about a 30 pixel margin. We're actually going to be using padding, but typically in design we think of this as the margin. But if you think of like Excel or something like that, padding is kind of like the space inside the area. So in this main area, the padding is the area that's inside there. Margin would actually be outside there according to CSS. But this is, we're going to have like 30 pixel padding inside there. Over here on my nav, looks like we're going to have maybe like 24 pixel padding on that side. We'll still have 30 on the top. So we're going to write down a couple of these things. We want to look at some of the big measurements first. We looked at the header, we looked at the address bar, we looked at the footer. This section over here, which is our aside where the pictures are, is 191. We're going to round that down to 190. And then this section over here for the nav is, I think it's coming up at 185. We're going to round that down to 184. And what that'll do is leave our middle section should be 466. So since we rounded down 2 of them, it's 464 right now. That's going to get rounded up to 466. So we're going to have 466 for the main section. For the nav, we're going to have 184. And for the aside section, it's going to be 190. We'll use those numbers. And if you're a little off, as long as they add up to 840, if you went with 186 and this one was 190 and this is 464, that's fine too. We're just going to make sure they add up. But those numbers will mean something once we do our CSS. So whatever numbers you use, make sure you write them down. Also, we're going to just take a look at this and make sure, I mentioned, our padding on this side is going to be a little less. It's going to be 24. We're not going to use 30 because we want more room for our buttons to show up. Also, what we're going to do with our eyedropper is we're going to sample colors, and we're going to use these in our CSS on our page. So for the address bar and the footer, I'm going to click on here with my eyedropper, and when I click, it's going to show up in my foreground color, and I'm just going to double click on my foreground color and look at this number down here. This is the hex number. It's really an RGB number, but it converts it to hex because they don't use 3-digit numbers. They actually convert them to 2 digits. When it goes up to 10, they start using letters. That's why you'll see colors with letters in there as well. They go up to 0 through 9, and then it's A through F. So at the high end, it's white, just like 255, 255. if I look at my color picker up here, just a little review of colors, if I go up here, when it's 255, 255, 255, that's white. That's all those sliders are all the way up and they're forming white in RGB color, and that's why the colors in hex is FF, 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 because that basically is 255. Same thing down to the other end. If I move these down to the other end, if my RGB colors are 0, 0, 0, my hex numbers are all going to be 0. And if some of them are the same, if you see the same numbers, here they're a little off, but they're going to be grays. So if you see things like CC 3366, if you see numbers like that, when all the RGB channels are the same, they will typically form a gray. So these are the numbers we're going to be looking at. So again, the first number, the first number we were looking at for the bars was the C3A868, and that will be different based on your layout, because I'm sure you didn't use the same color. And I'll cancel that, and I know I'm going to use the same one down there, so I don't have to check that one. I'm going to check my aside background color, and I'm going to check that out, and I'm going to write down that number, 718762, and I'm going to check the background color of my nav section, which is a light beige for me, and it's F5E2B6, so I'm going to write down that one as well. And the only other color I need is going to be right here, the buttons that I have right now. And again, we'll be able to change these. So we could change these in CSS. It's really flexible, but we're just trying to get a starting point from our comp that we originally did. And I'm going to click here, and I'll double click, and I'm getting 465612. So I'm going to write down those numbers so I have them to use in my CSS. Because when you work in your CSS, you're going to be editing a lot of the CSS code. I don't expect you to know how to write CSS, but I am going to have you kind of learn from it by editing some of the code, and I have a lot of comments in the code so you can see what it does, and we'll kind of learn some of our CSS and HTML from doing that. And the last part we'll do here with our Photoshop file is going to be just taking our marquee, highlighting the top part of the header, and you could highlight outside of there. So this is going to be like the 160 by 840, and I'm going to do an edit copy merged, because that will get all the layers. And I'm going to go File New, File New, and it's coming out to 840, 160. Now when you go File New, it's going to actually make a file based on what you copied. Now I could change this to 160, so it'll crop off that 1 pixel. So I'm going to hit OK, and then I'm going to do Edit Paste. And you can hit OK if you get these color profiles. Now it makes a layered document. We don't need to keep this document. We're only going to use this to save a JPEG, and that's what I'm going to do right now. And I'm going to use File, Save for Web. And Save for Web, you may have 2 up, you may have 4 up like this. The first one's the original. You don't want to use that. It'll say original. But any of the others, and basically the rule is if it's photographic, it's going to be JPEG. That's all we have to worry about right now. We don't have to worry about GIFs or pings or anything. If there's photographic imagery, it's JPEG. And I typically just use very high. You can leave it on optimized, and I'm just going to hit save. And now where I'm going to save it, I'm going to use the folder where I have my project in. I have it called sample here in CG2. And I'm going to put it in my site folder, that P2 JLC site, and I'm going to put it in my images folder, and I'm going to call it header. So I'm just going to call it header.jpg, and it's going to go in my images folder, and I'll hit save. And that's it. I don't need this untitled file because anything that I used here, I have here. So I don't need to have another layered file. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do, the last thing I'm going to do with this Photoshop file is highlight this area here. So I'll highlight this side, and I'm going to do Edit, Copy, Merged, so it gets all the layers. And I'll go File, New. And again, it'll show me a size. Now it's showing 381. Don't worry about the height right now. You can, I guess we can crop it down if we want. And the height, we're going to make that 190 as well. So you can crop this down slightly. You're not even going to notice it, but we'll just kind of trim it off when we do it. So I'm going to hit OK. And then I'm going to do Edit Paste. You don't have to do anything special with it, just paste. And there's our image pasted. Look for any white around there. If you did have like a little white strip or anything, make sure it would be on the left side so that it matches up with the main section. You wouldn't want a white section on the right. So this is fine right now. And what I'm going to do is do File, Save for Web, and I should just use the same settings. I'm going to use JPEG very high and hit Save. And I'm just going to call this Aside. And you could call it Aside Pics if that helps you. I'll just write Aside Pics just so I know that that's the pics section. And I'll save it in the same place, Images. And I'll close this up. And we're going to be pretty much ready to go. We won't have to use this anymore. I'll have the text for you inside of the file. It's going to be in our HTML file. So we'll have all the copy. You may want to go back and look at it for some reason, but as long as you have all the colors and all the measurements kind of written down, we should be ready to go and start working on our HTML and our CSS on the next part of this.